everyone. Felicitations. And this is me, Felicia Day. And this is my first episode of my interviews. I think I mentioned in my last felicitations that I'm breaking up the podcast into certain sections of entertainment so that they're all going to go in the same feed, but I'll have my felicitations by myself. I will have the Geeks Book Club uploaded once a month, and once a month I will interview someone really, really interesting. And I'm very excited to have my first interview be with an author who is incredible. She's also really cool on Twitter. She has great hair, and her camera is almost as good as mine, and I'm a little almost jealous of that. No, I'm very excited. Her name is Catherynne M. Valente. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good because I'm here.
Yay! Do people call you Cat or are you Catherynne?
Yes, everyone calls me Cat. I barely respond to Catherynne.
I know. I was going to say Cat, but I was like, I don't know if I know you well enough to say Cat. That's really presumptive. I should have asked this before we went on the air, but I nailed it.
Yes, absolutely. Call me Cat.
So we followed each other on Twitter for many years, and I started following you because I loved The Girl Who Circumnavigated the Fairyland in a Ship of Her. I loved this book so much. And I've read other Palimpsest, I believe. Palimpsest. I can't pronounce that word. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Nobody can. I regret so deeply having named the book that, because like we were talking about long titles before we started recording, and the other one is like, maybe, hey, don't name your book after a word that nobody can pronounce or knows what it means.
And your new book is called Osmo,
Unknown and the Eightpenny Woods.
So you went with a long
title again. Yeah, it actually started out as a short title, but my publisher wanted a different title, and so we ended up sort of workshopping, and it got longer and longer, and now I'm like, I'm typing out a 1,000-letter title. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of works for you. It's kind of on brand for you to have a very long title.
It seems to work out that like my books for younger readers have long titles, and my books for adults have like 1-word or 2-word titles.
They're super obscure. There was one about the disco. I still have it on my Kindle. I have not.
Space opera.
Yes, I have it on my Kindle. I'm very upset that I have not read it yet. I just when we were doing this interview, I wanted to read that before this, and then I didn't get around to it because I went to Mexico, and I like to read themed books when I'm on vacation. Do you do that?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So when I went to Hawaii, I read the Sarah Vowell book about how the West just basically stole the Hawaiian Islands from the native people, which is not like the most up thing to read when you're on vacation.
Super cheerful.
Super cheerful. And then when I went to Mexico, I read a book on essays about the Mexican psyche and culture, which I will admit I switched the Mexican zombie book. But I'm going to finish it, damn it. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I do the same thing. My husband's Australian. So like the first time that I went to Australia, I read The Fatal Shore, which is a brutal history of Australia. Like, oh my God, it's so depressing and so awful.
Tell me, is it about like the Aborigines and like?
Yeah, it is, from Botany Bay onwards. And like somewhere over the Pacific, I was like, why did I make this choice? I want to like this place.
Yeah. It is interesting when we dig into the past. I want to read, I'm really fixated now on reading about Japanese history because I was really fascinated by the fact that they closed their borders. They wouldn't let anyone in for hundreds of years. And I'm like, that's maybe a factor of why they're so strong. They just didn't let the missionaries in. I mean, it always starts, right, with a missionary coming in, trying to convert people and then taking over. It's a sad tale that's repeated over and over again.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I lived in Japan for 3 years, and
you did?
Yeah, I did. I am in my previous life that always really weirds people out when I tell them I was a Navy wife.
Wait, can you tell me a little bit about that? How was it to live in Japan?
It was really interesting. I hadn't had it as an ambition to live in Japan. I wasn't looking for that to happen in my life, but I was excited when it did happen. I was young and dumb and married somebody that, maybe that was not the greatest idea. And the Navy is hard, even if it is the greatest idea to be apart for that long. And this was all during the Iraq War as well. So like, I didn't see my husband for like 25 months. Like it was crazy. So I was by myself most of the time I was in Japan. And because I was young, this was my prep work. I'm moving to Japan. God knows how long, years. I will read every Japanese folktale and fairy tale I can get. my hands on. Surely this will prepare me to navigate the subway in Tokyo. No, it prepared me for literally nothing. I don't know what I was thinking, but that was my prep work.
But you know a lot about yokai and
I do know a
Oni.
lot about yokai. I know a lot about really old stories in Japan, and I did eventually learn to navigate the subway.
That's very cool. I am very well versed in yokai because my daughter, I don't know if you do this with your child. Your child is 3 years old now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I've been watching. I really feel like I know you because you're one of the Twitter people. You know how Twitter, you follow a lot of people and you don't see a lot of updates. For some reason, I always see yours. So I'm like, oh,
Oh.
Bastion, look what, I don't know, see what your kid's doing. We've never met, but I love it. I love that about Twitter. But yeah, I don't know if you do this with your kid, but I have always been obsessed with folklore. I tried to weasel my way into folklore classes in college. They wouldn't let me in because it was a major only, but I tried my best. But I love fairy tales. I love folklore. And from a young age, I've read my kid those things rather than Disney. So she's like she knows like Enkidu and, like she
Yeah.
knows a lot more about folklore even than I did when I was a kid. But do you do the same thing with your kiddo?
He's not like totally there where he wants to listen to a long-ish story yet, but with the picture books, I do try to get things from all kinds of different cultures. My mom used to do that for me when I was young. She would just, anything that said fairy tales from around the world, she would just buy it. And so I
Wow.
have all these collections that mishmash together. There'll be one story that's just straight up Cinderella, and then there'll be some weird thing from the Czech Republic or some other thing that you've never heard of. Like one of my favorites is Robert the Devil. That I've always wanted to write something based on it because it's such a bizarre story and a story about mothers and children. So this was a real folktale that was sort of current in about 14th century France. This is in my copy of whatever anthology it was, like sandwiched between, Sleeping Beauty and Momotaro or something like that. And so the devil had a son. Apparently, like the Antichrist is sort of a final draft thing, and you got to go through a lot of them before you get to that, or just workshop it. And so Robert is the son of the devil. He is a psychopath. Everyone's terrified of him from the time he is very small. He kills people as toddlers, like full Damien, 100%. Goes to the Crusades, because where else are you going to go if you really enjoy killing people? And it's 14th century France. So goes to the Crusades, murders everyone with great delight. Wears their entrails for hats, the whole nine.
Ew.
I know, goes home. And because he's the devil's son, proceeds to like murder everybody around the castle where his mother lives and everything, and like have a grand old time drinking and screwing and killing people. And then when he gets to his mother's room, she's so upset and disappointed with him.
She's like, oh, damn, you're a murderer. This is a real
I know,
downer.
like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. But this is no joke what happens. He's so horrified that his mother is upset with him that he becomes a good man and becomes a monk and goes into seclusion for the rest of his life to thwart the devil's plan to make him be the Antichrist that brings the end times. It's the power of a mother's disappointment.
Wow. I mean, if that worked, there'd be a lot better people in the world, but that is beautiful. That
Yeah.
weird. Is it an old French story?
Yeah, it's an old French, sort of around the period of the Black Pope and Avignon and all that.
I mean, I love reading old stories where it's clear that what they're used to back then is nothing what we're used to now. I mean, people die, people are assaulted, people have limbs cut off, and it's just like they execute people. It's a weekend, have holiday. It's so funny to see through those stories what was normative back then. And what they
Absolutely.
wanted to normalize because people died all the time. Kids died, your sisters and brothers would die. If somebody didn't die, that seems like it would be kind of unusual.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could get a scratch and just die of an infection. Like there were so many, a million ways to die in the Occident. But yeah, there you could die so quickly, and there was no separation between life and death the way there is in our culture, where somebody dies and then somebody comes and gets the body, and you don't see the whole process. No, like all this happened in front of you, the decomposition and the smells and the sights, and like that's your loved one, and it was awful.
Yeah.
And anytime you read significantly in medieval literature, like you kind of come away understanding that basically all humans were traumatized at all times
At all times.
for most of human history.
Or it's
And
just normalized, right? Death
yeah.
is normalized, dying. And so the approach, because I was really into the Black Plague, like super
Mm,
into it. And I've read so many books on it. And it's so interesting to try to draw a little bit of comparison to what we're going through now, which is the equivalent, even though we do have millions of people who've died, but it isn't like one out of every two or three people we know is
yeah.
dead. But the equivalent is still happening, like the labor shortages, the inflation, the social unrest, kind of looking at the world order and being like, hey, you know what? No, we're not doing this anymore. It's really interesting to see that happening now, but it seems like they were a lot more used to it back then because there'd be just waves of sickness going through more often.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about the Black Plague, but there were many, many Black Plagues. It came back over and
Yeah.
over again in various parts of the world. And of course, all the squirrels in California have it.
Yeah, exactly. I know they do. They do.
Yeah.
Ugh. So tell me, okay, let's back up a little bit. So you were a Navy wife. You lived in
Yeah.
where did you live in Kyoto or where are
I
you
lived in
stationed?
I lived in Yokosuka, which is sort of just south of Yokohama.
Oh, okay. That's where the people were based. Yeah, because my dad was in the military as well, and I was so excited to be stationed overseas. I wanted to go to Germany or Korea so bad, but my mom was like, "No, we got to stay in the South." So, what did I get? But strange upbringing. That's what I got. So where were you born, and what kind of led you to here being an author?
Yeah, so I was born in Seattle. My parents were divorced like a minute after I was born.
Oh, wow, efficient.
Really, really, not a minute, but like close, very, very quickly. So I do think that this is part of why I ended up being who I am. So I would spend like most of the year. My dad had custody of me, very unusual for the '80s. But I would spend most of the school year up in Seattle, where it's cold and dark, and I was living with my dad. And then I would go for summers where it's warm and golden, and my mother lives in California. So it
Wow.
just seemed like Persephone was a documentary about me, like
Yeah,
to a narcissist child, all
of
children.
course, of course.
But
My daughter is obsessed with. Have you ever seen what is that famous Greek myth book? It's the French name.
Dolaires,
D'Olaires. Yeah,
yes. Okay,
that
it's
was
one of my favorite things of all time.
me too.
Also, low key, it's one of those things where you can say it and people will just light up, as I just did, because there's like this Dolaires kids ribbon of people who grew up with it and just absolutely love it. I have all of their books. I love them so much.
I don't have the other ones. I just found out they had a Norse one as well, and I need to get it.
Mhm.
But
And a
they're
troll one.
yeah, and it was a married couple who did it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I was obsessed with the Greek myths when I was a kid, and I was particularly obsessed with that picture of Persephone and Demeter. And as soon as I showed that to my kid, she decided I was Demeter and she was Persephone.
Aw.
So she is she definitely she's going to be a liberal arts major. I know she will. Okay, so you grew up in two different worlds, which
Yeah.
is interesting because you have a lot of different themes in your work about going back and forth between worlds. I wonder if that's
Yep.
kind
I
of
think
ties
that
in.
pretty much comes from there's never a point in my life where that wasn't a huge feature of what was shaping the structure of my world. Like
Hmm.
this chunk of time is in a completely different state as this chunk of time. I
Yeah.
actually never saw my parents stand side by side until my second wedding. Yeah, like
Wow.
that was the level of separation. It's just very these bubbled worlds. So yeah,
Uh-huh.
there's sort of a portal fantasy thing going on
Yeah.
there.
And did you start writing at an early age? Did you always know you wanted to be a writer?
Well, I mean, I didn't ever have it in my head that being a professional writer was a thing that I could do because, like money, you need money in the world. So I just kind of assumed that I wouldn't get to do what I love to do, but I was writing from really, really early on. And before that, I was just telling stories. I've seen video of myself only a little older than my son is, just like going on and on. I literally can't stop talking about the wizard that lives under Mount Rainier and like what he wants from us and just this whole narrative. So I was doing it really early on. I wrote a lot of poetry before I started seriously attempting to write fiction. But I was going to be a teacher. That was my plan.
Wow.
I still love to teach. I just never kind of I don't want to get my hopes up. I think like you can get yourself sort of riled up on the idea that this can be your life and then it's crushing when it isn't. And so I kind of backed into publishing and a career. And I set a I set a goal really early on that basically as long as I was making as much as I would make as a barista, then I could keep going. But if it dropped below that, then I need to go back to grad school.
Wow. So you got your undergrad in teaching
No, I got it
or
in classics,
classics?
in
Okay.
ancient Greek and Latin. So I did the
Wow.
Dolaires proud. Um, and then I went to grad school. I have half a medieval studies master's, and I dropped out.
I mean, that's my fantasy. Sometimes my friend Sean Astin, he went back to school and got a master's in business during COVID, which I was
Wow.
like, what? And so his say, him saying that to me, I was like, wow, I could do that for sure. It would be back. I would go back, and I'm like, you weren't going to spend money going back to school to study something that absolutely is not applicable because it would absolutely be either classics or medieval stuff or some kind of something in that area. I'm like, no, no, Felicia, just read some books.
Yeah, look, if you classics is very language focused. If you, I'll teach you Greek if you want to learn Greek. You don't have to
No, no,
pay
I just like
for
well,
that.
I got
But
insomnia after I had a baby. I don't know if you had problems sleeping after you had a baby. It's
oh my God, yeah.
yeah. It's torture. It's literal torture. And it's still even it's in my life today. Like last night I didn't sleep. Because she got up and needed her dragon because she couldn't find her dragon, which was under her pillow. Okay, great. I'm awake now. But when I had particular insomnia, which exacerbated my anxiety. I would read the like Seneca and I would read like original Aristotle. Like just needed to go to sleep. Like honestly, it was that. But then I got really interested in it because it was my key to boredom.
You know, I thought I liked you before, but the fact that your solution to your maternal insomnia is reading Seneca, my heart.
I'm a pretty good stoic now. I think that's a pretty good philosophy, especially as a mom.
Have you read On the Briefness of Life? That's my favorite Seneca
No, I need to
bit.
read it. I
It's a
follow
short
Daily.
essay, but it's really good.
Okay, I follow Daily Stoic on Twitter, and I retweet them way too often because I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. You just sometimes you're made to suffer. So, what was your first piece of published material
Well,
about?
if we're counting like back to like college literary magazines and stuff, it was a poem called Virgil Among the Bees. But if we're counting, you know, real publishing for which I was paid, it was a novel called The Labyrinth.
So, it was
Uh,
your first published novel.
yeah, that was actually, I mean, that was really my first, it was my first long piece of fiction that I'd ever written.
Wow, that's rare to
But
get something published when you write your first long fiction.
it's weird, and I don't know, maybe it shouldn't have been. Like I look,
No.
it's so different. Like I'm not even recommending like that people go out to read it. It's so different than what I write now. But I was so young. I wrote it when I was 22, and I really like. I used to get mad when people said this, but now I accept it. I had no idea how to write a novel at all, so I just wrote a 200-page poem and like took the margins out, and like that was what I knew how to do. And then it's kind of like being a child star on television. Like if you line up all my books, you can watch me learn to write in public, in full view of everybody, zits and awkward height and voice changing and all.
I mean, that's everybody though, right? Unless you're just such a manufactured piece of content. Like, I mean, even child actors have to be, I think a lot of the
Yeah.
times we're like, oh, wow, they really break out. And then you see they worked for 10 years, or 15
Mm.
years. So I don't think anybody, I mean, you can't learn how to do anything without doing. And I
Yep.
sometimes, yeah, you probably shouldn't show that first draft. But at the same time, if like you, it got made, I'm sure that was a huge encouragement to you to keep
Oh,
going.
enormously so. Like, and Jeff Vandermeer is the one who emailed me to tell me that they were going to take my book, and he wanted to write the introduction for it. Like, you know, for that to be your sort of first entree into the beautiful world of publishing, that when you are a person like me growing up just like swooning over Dorothy Parker and every woman who ever published anything in a glamorous era in New York, like to have it come from somebody like that and become what it became, it was amazing. It really it was so lucky. There's so many points in my career, and Fairyland that you mentioned is one of them, where it's just like, well, that was where the actual magic in the world happened for me, and that was where it didn't. But
Yeah.
one of the places where it happened was those really early, very odd books actually finding a publisher and an audience.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of extraordinary. But and now I read, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I read online that the girl who circumnavigated Fairyland was that crowdfunded before you got a publisher? So please tell me
Yeah.
about that because that was such a revelation. If y'all haven't read it, it is a book aimed toward what 10 to 14-year-olds. So it's
Yeah.
a YA novel, but it is the most enchanting, beautiful, thought-provoking, and also kind of edgy in a way where you read it, you're like, oh, this is for kids, but I'm really resonating with this. And I think there's 5 in the series, correct?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So I would highly recommend it to adults or 10 to 14-year-olds because it is very mature and sort of an Alice in Wonderland thing. However old you are, you're going to take something from it. And so how did you crowdfunded that? I need to know because
Uh,
2012 was very early for crowdfunding. I am a
ah,
crowdfunding person who crowdfunded in 2008 before we even had Kickstarter. And so I always wish we had started 4 years later because then I would have had some tools versus
yeah,
so
yeah.
hard.
Yeah, well, thank you for all the lovely things you said about Fairyland. The story I'm about to tell is absurd on the face of it, and like in some ways, I just still can't even believe that it happened. And I will say the Osmo Unknown that's coming out next week is kind of Fairyland for boys,
Oh, great.
sort of a Fairyland type story, but it's dealing with a lot of issues of masculinity. Had a baby boy, had some thoughts.
Huh?
But so this is actually 2009. So it was
Oh.
Kickstarter existed, but it had just started.
Mm-hmm.
And even Kindle publishing was not a thing that people were really trying yet.
No,
Like
no.
it just wasn't. So what essentially had happened is I wrote a book called Palimpsest that nobody, even my editors, still mispronounces it to this day.
It's a great word though, because I
It is
looked
a
up
good
the word and I
word,
was like,
but
oh, it's amazing.
but
It's
it throws people significantly. But so that book is about a sexually transmitted city. It is an adult with a capital A, sexy book. And in that book, the protagonist has a favorite novel from when she was a little girl, and it's The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making. And there's the first paragraph of the book is right there. It's completely intact from that all the way to what it became. And as part of, so the economy crashed also right before that book came out. And so it was Bantam Spectra, pretty big publisher, ceased to exist, was
oh,
reorganized back into Random House. There was nobody picking up the phones. And it was like my third big New York book. And we kind of all had to face that if it completely failed, I might be out. It was kind of a 3 strikes thing at the time, and it was pretty hard to sell any book to anyone when the whole economy had come down. So we did all this stuff, that kind of grassroots DIY marketing things, and we did an alternate reality game for the book. And
wow.
so, yeah, it was a lot of work, but it's pretty cool. Like basically a group of less than 10 people managed to like produce all the content for it. And one of the things that we had done was mock up an Amazon order page for that Fairyland book. Now it just redirects back to my website. They're never in stock. If you emailed the sellers, then there was, it would lead you further down into the game and all that stuff. But the combination of those things was the result of which was that when I toured for it, and I toured with a singer named S.J. Tucker, who did an album based on the book, we did these reading concerts all over the United States. Nobody understood what we were doing at all. Like
That is
this was just before that kind of thing was
it
more
was
common.
totally cutting edge. That is so
Yeah.
cool.
So we
And
ended
this
up
was all your idea? Like how
me and SJ basically, yeah. Uh,
wow.
and like because of that, we couldn't get like bookstores. Very few bookstores were willing to do it. They're like, we don't have sound equipment. No, we have our own sound equipment. It will be fine. Very few could we talk into it.
Yeah.
So we did it in sports bars. We did one in a hotel lobby. Like we'd get the strangest venues, like whoever would let us be the circus. And we picked up performers wherever we were. So like one time we had a snake dancer, but she was only there for like the St. Louis one. And we had like this crazy performance artist who like, tied me up and ripped the book into pieces, which made everybody freak out. Not me. That's like
Yeah,
just a
you know what
copy
was going
of it.
on. That sounds like
But
Amanda Palmer
yeah,
did something similar to that like a long time ago,
yeah,
right? But after that, certainly after that. That's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah. So we were doing all this, and then everywhere we stopped, people would say, "Where can I get that Fairyland book?" And I'd be like, "Well, it's postmodernism. Sometimes we do wacky things, like a book within a book." And they're like, "Oh, it sounded pretty cool." So after I got home from that tour, my then husband, my ex-husband, was laid off from 2 jobs back to back. And we had just moved to where I live now, which is an island in Maine, and kind of spent everything we had saved up to make that move. So I was like, all right, well, we don't have rent money. So that's great. I'm going to go do a serial novel online. I'll serialize it, Dickens style. But the question was, what am I going to write? Because at the time, there was a very real possibility that if I wrote a book online for free, even if there was a donation button, it would never get traditional publication.
Yeah, no,
It
there
was
was a
just a
big
very
stigma.
different world.
Very different world. They did not like the upstarts, and it also discredited you to do
Yep.
that kind of stuff. Yep.
Yeah. So it was a big risk. And so I was like, well, everybody wants to read Fairyland. And, nobody's actually going to publish a children's book that came out of like a book that legitimately has sex scenes every chapter. Like,
It's very
important.
It's very racy. I
It
will
is
tell you.
very racy.
Don't read
so I'm
your
not
kids
losing
that one.
because nobody would ever do that. So I started. I posted a chapter every Monday. And it was just on my website. There's just a subdomain on my website. That was it. There was nothing else to it because there were no tools, as you say.
No tools at all.
Yeah. So there was a donation button. It said, donate whatever you think the book is worth. If you can't afford it, that's great. Just enjoy it. If you don't like it, you don't have to leave anything. Thanks for your time. And like one of the things in the book, which is that there's a chapter and then there's a little sort of summary of what happens in the chapter underneath it. Chapter 1, in which blah, blah, blah. And people talked about it as though I invented that, which I did not. That's in like no. That's in Mallory from the medieval world. But
and the Friends, it's the title of Friends, the one where Rachel.
Exactly. It is the Friends episode. Oh my God, that's awesome. But it was because the landing page was organized with all the chapter links, and I needed people to click on those links to something more interesting than chapter 1. So a lot of you can see in the first Fairyland book sort of the DNA of it having been online. But I mean, people ask all the time, like, how to do a successful crowdfunding campaign. It was just a perfect storm. Like, everything was falling apart. People wanted to feel like they were doing something. Like a lot of what was going to happen to artists was sort of a thing people were talking about a lot. I had written 7 books that had something of an audience, but I'd never written anything for kids. So there were a lot of people out there who had not been able to share my work with their kids. But within about 24 hours, it went completely viral.
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
And what do you think that was? Was it like Reddit? Was it just word of mouth?
It was Boing Boing and then Neil Gaiman.
Oh, Boing Boing. Yeah. Boing Boing was super powerful back then.
People don't realize, like, if you got on Boing Boing, it was going to move.
Yep. I definitely, I think the Guild got on Boing Boing once, and there was like early on, if you got a bounce like that or Dig, remember Dig?
Yeah, oh God, yeah.
The opposite of Boing Boing, but still, it was very powerful, those sort of storefronts, because people didn't really know where to go on the internet. It was really, it was less centralized. It was centralized in that nobody had anywhere to go. So it was like, we'll go to the 5 places we know to get our news.
Well, yeah. And remember, like, we used to just type random things into the address bar, see if they were something. Like, it was not, there weren't these sort of walled gardens the way there are now with Facebook and Reddit and everything like that. Yeah. So it was a whole different thing. And I remember that what Neil actually posted was like kind of almost like a challenge, like basically, and this question is ridiculous now because there's Patreon and all that stuff. But none of this existed at the time.
No, there's no tool. There were no tools. No tools whatsoever to be able to conduct the business that we were trying to do. The Guild was just a struggle but it was also so innovative because you're like, well, that's a good idea. We don't have a tool for that. Let's just do it. We'll figure out how to do it. You didn't wait for the tool. You made the tool yourself.
Yeah. Like, find a programmer, offer something and see what you can come up with. And what Neil posted was something along the lines of like, can fans help a writer pay her rent or help a writer eat or something like that. Wow. And it kind of was like, without saying go do this thing, it felt like a challenge. So people did, they saved me, they saved us, saved our house. Like, they donated money and were so supportive of it and loved it. And I hope part of it was the quality. I think I managed to write a pretty good book.
You did. It's really wonderful. Now, did you plan it? Did you plan it out? So you wrote it serialized. So this is my challenge as a person, because I get so thinky as a writer. I get so caught in the weeds that I have to kind of know what's going on before I write, but then I'm paralyzed and never write. So like the fact that you're saying you kind of like just wrote this as you went along makes me so excited to try to something like that one day, because They always say, "Oh, you have to know your ending and all that." Did you know a little bit about the ending, or you just kind of just
No,
wrote for fun?
no. So it's so funny. Like after sort of 3, 4 weeks after it started, I was at a convention and somebody like raised their hand in the panel audience and said, like, I'm reading the Fairyland thing online. Like, do you realize you can't go back and change anything? And I literally said, oh, fuck. Because I hadn't thought about it. I just hadn't thought about it. I was just pay my rent, just do it. I was in panic mode. And but I couldn't go back and change anything. So not only was it not really planned, it's functionally unedited, like the published version.
So you got picked up by a publisher to release it in
Did
stores and things like
yeah.
that. Did you do like a cleanup pass or like a writing pass, or you just that was it?
No, because it won the Nebula for YA before it was ever published.
Wow,
So
so you
that
couldn't change it.
manuscript, like, yeah, you can't change it. Yeah, so it was something else. But so I basically, like, the first act, there's God, there's 24 chapters because that's how many books there are in the Iliad and the Odyssey. There's
I get
the
it.
little Easter egg. Yeah. So the
That's
first
cool.
eight, the first act, I wrote just kind of screwing around. And I had written that first paragraph in Palimpsest, and then I had written like 2 or 3 more pages of it. And it is, again, intact completely to the final manuscript as part of the alternate reality game. So like they were prizes that you could unlock, that you could find more of this book. So a lot of that first part was just sort of taking things that I had thrown out as details with having no intention of having to pay them off at any point, and like giving them a reason, giving them a background, all of that sort of thing. And then after that kind of first act, I did take a step back and try and sort of sketch out the rest of it. And like there's a big twist in the ending, and that was where I kind of figured that out.
Hmm.
Um, but it was just kind of a sketchy scaffolding, and I wrote it. So it took 8 weeks to write. I stayed ahead of the posting schedule, but
Wow.
I think it started coming out in April and finished in October. But yeah, but I could go back and change a little bit by staying ahead of the weekly schedule, which I did,
Yeah, a
and I
little bit,
recorded
but
myself
still.
reading it as well.
Wow. That's
Um,
incredible. And you won a
yeah.
Nebula and you got published and you got four more books picked up by your publisher.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the first book debuted at number 8 on the New York Times list, which is still ridiculous. It's just
Yeah.
so absurd. Like people really, they responded to it so much. So much magic has happened in my life because of this series, and it really, like, the process of writing it, because I just didn't ever think it was going to get published like that. I
Well, there was
just
kind of a free, I guess you have this idea that you're writing for other people or under these circumstances which need to be pleased in order to get what you want. This one
mhm.
was just like, you're just writing. You were just
It was just
doing
play.
it.
It was just
Ah,
playing. And I, like, if I've learned anything, God, it is a true and awful thing to say, that if I have learned anything, it's that the best writing I do is when I'm just playing. It was the same with space opera, which I didn't think was going to be any kind of big deal, and became
which
a
is
huge
so,
hit.
yeah, I got to get into it. I know it's so
I
wacky and
think you'd
fun.
like it. I do think you'd
No,
like it a
it's right
lot.
there on my Kindle. I just keep obligating myself to reading other things. So I'm getting to that as well as Osmo. Now tell me, so you had this huge success in the YA area. Is it
Mhm.
hard to get to go back and forth? Like, is it hard for you to be like, as an artist, I'm going to go write an adult book, even though I know it might not be as successful as my Y. Like, do you get trapped in a path as an author because of success?
You can. It's very easy to. I've always been kind of conscious of that trap. So from very early on, like when Palimpsest came out, the reason that came out when it did, as opposed to the next book, which was Deathless, which is a fairy tale retelling, is that the one before was also a fairy tale retelling. I was like, if I do one more fairy tale book, I'm fairy tale girl forever.
Yeah.
So whatever comes out next, it cannot be based on a fairy tale. And I'm really conscious of that, trying something new every time. I also have severe ADHD, so I have to do something new every time. But like, I'm conscious of my brand being that I do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Weirdly, it seems to have settled into, I do a lot more fantasy for young readers and a lot more science fiction for adult readers. So I guess that helps a little bit. Going back and forth, I mean, it's just like shorter sentences, no swears, no sex. Like
It's not really that different.
that's basically it.
So
But
for all of your writing, so are you generally a person who plans a lot out, or do you kind of follow that methodology where you're writing and writing just with your sense of play? Like, what do you feel like? You say that your most successful is the stuff that you play most with, but
Yeah.
how do you approach your writing? Is it just different every project?
Yeah, so I actually kind of have stuck with that Fairyland technique where I kind of write the first act organically, just sort of seeing what happens, that kind of sense of play, and then I will structure more of it so that I know what I'm foreshadowing and all that kind of stuff. But I tend to try to keep the end hidden from myself,
Oh.
because if I know everything that happens and the ending, my brain's like, and I've written the book, I will see you later, I'm going on break. I can't risk that. So I try to, Murakami called it writing by your headlights, that you can see what's in front of you to a certain extent, but not the world all around. And I try to kind of keep it like that, because I write from the first word to the last word as well. I don't jump around or anything. So like I'm
Okay.
discovering the story at the same pace that a reader is.
Wow. And do you do a lot of character development before you start writing, or you have them kind of floating in your head? I mean, I'm so
Yeah, I do a
fascinated
lot
by
of
people's
planning.
techniques.
I do a lot of planning. So for each book, I get this big watercolor notebook because I really like the thick paper and everything. And that's where I'll just sort of like throw random lines and thoughts and ideas and names. Everything starts with names for me. Oh God, like everybody has to have their right name before I can start, at least the core cast. And the title of the book as well, even if it doesn't stick. So like I'll come up with the names, I'll start thinking about who they are as people. I ask myself all these like dumb HR questions, like if this book were a tree, what kind of tree would it be?
Oh.
And the same of my characters. I actually grew up acting, so a lot of my character work is the same that you would use to prepare for a role, because it
Wow.
is a role. I'm gonna have to embody that character as much as I would if I were handed a script and playing them. I still have to be them as I'm writing them. So
Yeah, yeah.
a
That's what
lot
when
of it.
I'm writing something right now and I'm just like, okay, I don't know what's going on here. What would I want to be if I were in their shoes? Like I literally am just like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm this person. Like what and it's I feel like I know so many screenwriters. I think part of me is like I grew up in the screenwriting world where they're super technical and super structural. And it's just very different approach to writing, and that's never worked for me. And so I'm trying to unlearn the rules of like that sort of you have to build your scaffolding, you have to have your homages. This is a scene like in like Transformer, whatever. That's the references that Hollywood people in they use in their work and their writing is so it's such a different set of tools, and so I have to unlearn it every time. And listening to you speak is very inspiring.
Oh, I'm really glad. I mean, like I said, I grew up in that world. So, I mean, when I teach, like I'm always forcing them to do drama school exercises. Like, you're gonna be an animal, God damn it! Like, get on all fours, be an animal. Because I think it's important when you're writing, mythical creatures and or aliens. Like, think about the physiology, think about how that changes a culture, think about how it changes your perspective to have 6 limbs instead of 4, or to have a center of gravity that's wildly different, or to be a hugely different size. I genuinely believe these things. It's not just that I want to
No, it's
torture you.
true. Like, just I'm learning Spanish now because my daughter is going to go to bilingual school and I want to learn Spanish too. And just thinking, about sentence structure and how they put the adjective in behind the noun versus in front. Like, it obviously affects how someone's point of view on life would be. And I'm like, well, that's probably with every single language. The language construction, the way that they express themselves absolutely affects their point of view as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so when I started out and The Labyrinth came out and the couple of books after it before The Orphan's Tales, which was the first like New York book, like people made a big deal about how unique my style was. It's not a unique style. I had 3 languages in my head. So I was writing English structured like Greek. Like
Oh,
that's why it seems like this
yes.
crazy style, because it's the sentence structure of an entirely different language with English vocabulary. That's the great secret. And it wasn't even something I did on purpose. It was that literally I had spent so long learning these languages, and that was my bread and butter and oxygen and water, that when I sat down to write something in English, I couldn't shake that structure from my head.
Wow.
I
And it
still have
doesn't.
problems with passive voice, because there's no problem with passive voice with ancient languages. It's
Oh, yeah.
not an
Passive voice is
issue.
great. It makes it sound so much better.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so
So,
funny. But also, because I love the flowery, it's very flowery and
mm,
formal, but in a way that's very, feels musical in a way.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
prose feels very musical, which is very okay. So let's talk about Osmo because this book is
Sure.
coming out next week. What day? The
Tuesday on the 26th.
26th. And is this aimed at this same kind of crowd that would love the Fairyland books?
Yeah,
Same age range?
absolutely. So it's technically a middle grade book, but I think that adults would like it just as much.
Of course.
If you have a kid who's 8 and an advanced reader, they'll probably also like it.
Oh,
It's based on a little bit of Finnish folklore. That was kind of the seed of the story. I went to a convention in Finland and I didn't know anybody as I normally would at conventions. So I tweeted that if anybody comes up and tells me a piece of Finnish folklore, fairy tale, urban legend, or joke, I would give them candy. So I had a big bag of Estonian candy. And it's the smartest thing I ever did at a con because we had automatic ice-breaking questions with everybody. And one of the things that somebody told me, I said right then, I said, I am probably going to write a book about that. I got to just warn you right now. And this is the book that came from that. And the piece of folklore was, I mean, they said it. I was like, is that real? I'm gonna Google that later, just like because it's so
so
crazy.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, bears are sacred in the old Finnish religion, and so for many, many centuries, and it is true. And right up to present day, though it's kind of a funny joke now, if you accidentally killed a bear, because you're not supposed to be hunting them. So it is presumed it was an accident because who would kill a bear on purpose? You have to supply a bride for the bear's ghost from among your children. I know, right? It's crazy. And so there's a whole ritual about it. The bear seems to be quite understanding as the kid can go on to get married normally, but they are also a bear.
They're a bear wife.
It is heteronormative, but gender neutral. Doesn't matter. Sons, daughters.
Bear companion. Bear companion. Okay.
Yeah, most of these things, it's just like, yeah, no, it's going to be your daughters. But no, it's a straight bear, I guess. Bear ghost. So that is what became Osmo Unknown. It's not bears. They're creatures called quidnuncs. That live out in the forest, and Osmo's mother is a hunter. She accidentally kills one of them. There is a long-standing treaty, and he is shipped off into the animal underworld, the afterlife of wild animals, to find the ghost that he's supposed to marry. And he has his companions. All of the animals, once you get sort of this whole metaphor about like it's like the ocean. Once you get into the deep woods, then you get the really weird animals. So they're all mixed up. All the animals are mixed up. So he's got his friends, which are Nevermore, who is a pangolin. She's half girl, half pangolin, and Bonk the Cross, who is a skunk, badger, wombat, scadbat. And you have to have witnesses to your wedding. So they are unwillingly ordered to go with him, and the rest of it is the adventure through the underworld. So it's kind of a gender reversed Persephone story, kind of where the wild things are, and it's got a lot of big gender feels in it. One of the things I really love to do and find valuable to do in my work for younger readers is to say the things that I think are important about the world but I cloak it in all of this magical stuff so that conservative parents don't notice.
It really does make it easier to make any art when you really feel like it's really important. Like you're trying to say something important. I feel like that's the key to anything, because if you have nothing under it, you can't get through the hard stuff to get it done.
Yeah. So there's a lot of big gender identity stuff going on under the curtain of these mixed up animals, because everything has two natures, is the rule of the forest.
Wow.
And and like one of the big motifs is that Osmo's dad tells him to be a man over and over again. What does that mean when you are in the kingdom of the wild, and being a man is not nearly as important, but might be a detriment to your survival. So yeah, it's there's a lot going on in it, and hopefully most of it flies under the radar of parents who would have an issue with it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you wrote it as a response to having a little boy, because I have to tell you, I picked a little girl. I did IVF, and when you do IVF and you do genetic testing, you get to know the sex of the fetus. And so I decided to use the girl embryos first, and one of them stuck. So I was actually really paranoid about having a little boy. Now that I've had a child, I'd be like, either would have been fine. But before I had a baby, I was like, I don't know how I will relate to a little boy as well as a little girl. Did you have any sort of like feelings about, being the mother to a little boy and those kind of themes? And are they in that book?
I
This book?
really did. Not because I don't like boys, gender doesn't matter. And if it
Of
doesn't
course,
matter, it
of
doesn't
course.
matter. But what I think part of why I had such a hard time with it is because, I've been writing books about like how to be a strong girl and like, how to, from that perspective for so long. I didn't really know what I could give to a boy. Like, what do I have to teach? What do I know about being a boy in America? Like, what do I have to teach,
Hmm.
this child? And like got like I like okay, I had to like embrace like if it's monster trucks, it's monster trucks. Like I have to be willing to be supportive of whatever he wants to do. And I think I remember the moment that I started feeling a little differently about that. I think I was about 6 months pregnant. So like at the one of the peaks of you're gonna cry at everything. I was watching the first episode of Pose, and there's a scene where it's a scene from many movies where the gay kid has ballet shoes under his bed and his dad beats the crap out of him and tells me, no son of mine, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
just lost it. Just like huge tears rolling, dripping off my face. Because I was like, I don't know if I'll be a good mother, but I know my boy will never have that happen to him. All I would ever say is, I will buy you better ballet shoes than that. And what happened when I had him is it's not monster trucks at all. He is not a terribly gender conforming child because we've never made a big deal of it, and he likes what he likes, which is classical music and space.
Wow, classical. I
Yeah.
am so jealous. I was a classical musician and my child will not let me play it.
Oh, what did you play?
She loves kid songs. She'll be like, I have Spotify and I'm like, she wants to hear all pirate songs or all mermaid. I've had to make so many theme specific playlists. One time she asked me, I want animal police officer songs. And I'm like, I don't know if that subset of songs works. I don't know if there are enough of them for a whole playlist. I'll try my best. So and then she's obsessed with Encanto. So, Disney
Oh
songs.
yeah.
I'm really good. I'm really careful about not showing her Disney. I mean, she's seen a couple of Moana and, the ones that are more progressive. I'm pretty, I love fairy tales. And yet when I started reading fairy tales to her, I was kind of horrified because I see why women are like women,
Yeah.
why how the culture creates women in the way that they want to use them best. And beautiful is always it. And it made me so upset that that's a message that is literally indoctrinated in little girls so that they adopt it as truth without even ever being given an alternative. So,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I don't want my kid to be an outcast, homeschooled nerd, person who's always outside looking in like I am. So it's
Yeah.
like, how do I introduce something to her that everybody's looking at, but then I'm like, oh, maybe it's not so good to like, I don't know, marry the person who wakes you up. Like, I do my best, but I'm sure I'm going to fail somehow. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. No, like he loves music so much. He's really, really taken to it. Like he has his own favorite classical composer, and I think before I had him, I probably could have told you that Edvard Grieg was a composer if I had multiple choice. But I
Wow.
definitely, yeah, that's his man, Edvard Grieg. He loves Edvard Grieg, and he says Alexa, play Morning Mood by Edvard Grieg. Like it's all that's part of the title to him. Uh,
Amazing.
but his music taste is also he basically likes queer anthems. It's Raining Men is a huge favorite at the moment. And he likes like trash meme music from the early, like he loves Gangnam Style and
Oh yeah.
Numa Numa and all that early internet stuff. And like empowered Black Lady, that's what he wants. He actually gets upset if men sing hip hop or rap because in his mind
Wow.
that's for Lizzo and Salt and Pepper. That's not for
Not for
men.
you. That's so, I think it's really interesting that people can claim, oh, you're making your kid into that. I'm like, no, not my kid.
They like what they like.
My kid likes what she likes. And I try to expose her to different things and she'll either, hook onto it or not. But like, they are people are born the way that they're, and that's the saddest thing to me is, like you said with the post, like when people are born the way they're born and then their parents try to change them or tell
Yeah.
them they can't be like that. Because that is that to me is literally the saddest thing in existence, to not to be allowed to be who you are.
Absolutely. And that was always like, I wanted to have a kid to find out who they would be, not to make him be the way I want him to. I'm delighted, and it feels like an absolute miracle every time he does like something that I like. But he doesn't have to like any of it. He can like whatever he wants, and I will pursue that. I ended up making him this rocket ship. Obviously, I'm into space, like as a science fiction writer, but I built him this rocket ship out of cardboard and duct tape. And like a lot of things with me, it got really overly complicated. But now there's this massive 4-foot tall heptagon rocket ship in our house, and it's got a complete like cockpit and everything works and turns. I had to learn how to build it.
Cool.
I'm not good at this.
I think I've seen pictures of it. Have you
Yeah.
posted pictures? Yeah, because I've seen some
Yeah.
pretty cool stuff at your house.
Yeah. So, but every time like he likes something, I try to, bring it, especially with the pandemic, like bring it into our house so that it's a thing he can experience without getting sick. And that's been really, I'm sure it's so hard to raise these kids to be exposed to the amount of things that they should be exposed to during a pandemic.
Especially during the pandemic. Yeah. I mean, I feel like if you're in a smaller, like I live in Los Angeles, so I do feel very fortunate. Like we went the other day to the Japanese grocery store and we got things to make miso soup. And then we went down to do some Holi festival. Like, the wonderful thing about living in a big city is that it's just 1 second away to expose your kid to new things. But at the same time, yeah, when you're in your house, it's just tough, and they don't learn online. So shout out to anybody raising anybody under 5 right now. You're a champion.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, we don't live in a big city. Like we live on this little island, which is off the coast of Portland, Maine, biggest city in Maine.
I've never been to Maine. I'm sorry.
Oh, you should come to Maine. It's cool.
I will. If I'm ever in the neighborhood, I will call you.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's still like only 150,000 people who live in Portland. So it's still not a big city. But the effect of all this is that my son's obsessed with the city. And he's like, Mama, we got to go to the city today. And he just loves it. And as soon as he calls it Brick City because it's New England, so there's bricks everywhere. Yeah. But he'll be like, okay, now let's go to a different city. It breaks my heart. He wants to be out in the world so much. And he's so just transported in any kind of urban environment. My husband and I are very city mouse, country mouse. So he's clearly got the city mouse gene. But if he lived in a bigger city, I think he probably would have had a little better time of it. But it's
you're doing the best. We're all doing our best.
Our house. So we let him, move toward the things that he likes to move toward and try to follow and try to help. Yeah. He also likes pirates. That's been a big one lately.
But also at the same time, like I've raised a kid who has had every single thing available to her. If I ever moved somewhere smaller, it would be a downgrade. Like everything would be a downgrade. So it's, we all have our challenges and we're just all doing our best. I could talk to you for 8 more hours. I'm fascinated with everything. Fun. It really has been super fun. I hope there's another occasion where we get to chat. If we're ever at conventions together, dinner and all that stuff. But please tell the audience just one more time where they can find your work and tell them about your newest book that's coming out.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Cat Valente at Patreon as well. I'm CM Valente on Facebook because apparently Cat Valente, there's some other Cat Valente who was faster than me. So on that one thing, I'm CM Valente, everything else is Cat Valente, and I'm CatherynneValente.com. Osmo Unknown and the Eightpenny Woods is coming out on Tuesday, April 26th. And that's it. That's me.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out and being my very first interview. This is wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.